The American empire is coming to an end. The US economy is being drained by wars in the Middle East and vast military expansion across the globe. It is burdened by growing deficits, along with the devastating effects of deindustrialization and global trade agreements. Our democracy has been captured and destroyed by corporations that steadily demand more tax cuts, more deregulation, and impunity from prosecution for massive acts of financial fraud, all the while looting trillions from the US Treasury in the form of bailouts. The nation has lost the power and respect needed to induce allies in Europe, Latin America, Asia, and Africa to do its bidding. Add to this the mounting destruction caused by climate change, and you have a recipe for an emerging dystopia. Overseeing this descent at the highest levels of the federal and state governments is a motley collection of imbeciles, con artists, thieves, opportunists, and warmongering generals. And yes, I am also speaking about the Democratic Party. The empire will limp along, steadily losing influence until the dollar is dropped as the world's reserve currency, plunging the United States into a crippling depression and instantly forcing a massive contraction of our military machine. Short of a sudden and widespread popular revolt, which does not seem likely, the death spiral appears unstoppable, meaning the United States as we know it will no longer exist within a decade, or at most two. The global vacuum we leave behind will be filled by China, already establishing itself as an economic and military juggernaut. Or perhaps there will be a multipolar world carved up among Russia, China, India, Brazil, Turkey, South Africa, and a few other states. Or maybe the void will be filled, as the historian Alfred McCoy writes, by a collection of transnational corporations, multilateral military forces like NATO, and an international financial leadership self-selected at Davos and Bilderberg that will forge a supranational nexus to supersede any nation or empire. Under every measure, from financial growth and infrastructure investment to advanced technology, including supercomputers, space weaponry, and cyber warfare, we are being rapidly overtaken by the Chinese. In April 2015, the US Department of Agriculture predicted that the American economy would grow by nearly 50% over the next 15 years, while China's economy is predicted to triple and come close to surpassing America's by 2030. China became the world's second largest economy in 2010, the same year it became the world's leading manufacturing nation, pushing aside a United States that had dominated the world's manufacturing for a century. The Department of Defense issued a sober report. At our own peril, DoD risk assessment in a post-primacy world. It found that the US military, and I quote, no longer enjoys an unassailable position versus state competitors, and it no longer can automatically generate consistent and sustained local military superiority at range.
Fascism is not just about jacket boots and brown shirts. According to Pulitzer-winning journalist Chris Hedges, it is here, rooted in the very institution we trust. Welcome to our breakdown of fascism in the age of Trump, where the real danger lies beneath the surface. Watch and pay attention, and I will share my thought later.
It does not matter who wields it. The rebel for this reason is an eternal heretic. He or she will never fit into any system. The rebel stands with the powerless, and there will always be powerless people. There will always be injustice, and the rebel will always be an outsider. And resistance requires eternal vigilance. The moment the powerful are no longer frightened, the moment the glare of the people is diverted and movements let down their guard, the moment the ruling elites are able to use propaganda and censorship to hide their aims, the gains made by resistors roll backward. We have steadily been stripped of everything that organized men and women who rose up in defiance and were purged, demonized, and killed by the capitalist elites achieved with the New Deal. The victories of African Americans who paid with their bodies and blood in making possible the Great Society and ending legal segregation also have been reversed. The corporate state makes no pretense of addressing social inequality or white supremacy. It practices only the politics of vengeance. It uses coercion, fear, violence, police terror, and mass incarceration as its primary form of social control. Our cells of resistance will have to be rebuilt from scratch. The corporate state, however, is in trouble. It has no credibility. All the promises of the free market, globalization, trickle-down economics have been exposed as a lie, an empty ideology used to satiate greed. And the elites have no counter-argument to their anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist critics. The attempt to blame the electoral insurgencies in the United States' two ruling political parties on Russian interference rather than massive social inequality is a desperate ploy. The courtiers and the corporate press are working feverishly day and night to distract us from reality. The moment the elites are forced to acknowledge social inequality is the root of our discontent, is the moment they are forced to acknowledge their role in orchestrating this inequality. The US government, subservient to corporate power, has become a burlesque. The last vestiges of the rule of law are evaporating. The kleptocrats are pillaging and looting like barbarian hordes. Programs instituted to protect the common good, public education, welfare, and environmental regulations are being dismantled. The bloated military sucking the marrow out of the nation is unassailable. Poverty is a nightmare for half the people. Poor people of color are gunned down with impunity in the streets. Our prison system is filled with the destitute, and presiding over the chaos and dysfunction is a political P.T. Barnum, a president who, while we are being fleeced, offers up one bizarre distraction after another, like Barnum's Fiji mermaid. There are no shortage of artists, intellectuals, and writers from Martin Buber and George Orwell to James Baldwin who warned us that this dystopian era was fast approaching. But in our Disneyfied world of intoxicating and endless images, cult of the self, and willful illiteracy, we did not listen. Soren Kierkegaard argued that it was the separation of intellect from emotion, from empathy, that doomed Western civilization. For the soul has no role in a technocratic society. The communal has been shattered, the concept of the common good obliterated. Greed is celebrated, the individual is a god, the celluloid image is reality. The artistic and intellectual forces that make transcendence and the communal possible are belittled or ignored. The basest lusts are celebrated as forms of identity and self-expression. Progress is defined exclusively by technological and material advancement. And this creates a collective despair and anxiety that feeds and is fed by glitter, noise, and the false promises of consumer culture idols. The desperate or the despair grows ever worse, but we never acknowledge our existential dread. As Kierkegaard understood, the specific character of despair is precisely this: it is unaware of being despair. Those who resist are relentlessly self-critical. They ask the hard questions that mass culture, which promises an unachievable eternal youth, fame, and financial success, deflects us from asking. What does it mean to be born? What does it mean to live? What does it mean to die? How do we live a life of meaning? What is justice? What is truth? What is beauty? What does our past say about our presence? How do we defy radical evil? We are in the grip of what Kierkegaard called sickness unto death, the numbing of the soul by despair that leads to moral and physical debasement. Those who are ruled by rational abstractions and an aloof intellectualism, Kierkegaard argued, are as depraved as those who succumb to hedonism, cravings for power, violence, and predatory sexuality. We achieve salvation when we accept the impediments of the body and the soul, the limitations of being human. Yet despite these limitations, seek to do good. This burning honesty, which means we always exist on the cusp of despair, leaves us, in Kierkegaard's words, in fear and trembling. We struggle not to be brutes while acknowledging we can never be angels. We must act and then ask for forgiveness. We must be able to see our face in the face of the oppressor. Paul Tillich did not use the word sin to mean an act of immorality. He, like Kierkegaard, defined sin as estrangement. For Tillich, it was our deepest existential dilemma. Sin was our separation from the forces that give us ultimate meaning and purpose in life. This separation fosters alienation, anxiety, meaningless, and despair that are preyed upon by mass culture. As long as we fold ourselves inward, embrace a perverted hyper-individualism that is defined by selfishness and narcissism, we will never overcome this estrangement. We will be separated from ourselves, from others, and from the sacred. Resistance is not only about the battling of the forces of darkness. It is about becoming a whole and complete human being. It is about overcoming estrangement. It is about the capacity to love. It is about honoring the sacred. It is about dignity. It is about sacrifice. It is about courage. And it is about being free. Resistance to radical evil is the pinnacle of human existence. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you all again for being here. We're going to do a question and answer session, and if you want to ask a question, you can start lining up here at this mic. Depending on how long the line is, it'll go this way into the community room. It's a lot to think about. It's scary, you know. Bringing Chris here, it feels like group therapy, right? We're figuring out what is going on in this world and how can we work together? What can we do to make it better? Can we make it better? And that's what we're doing here at the sanctuary every day. Again, the radio station is a huge opportunity to amplify all of that. You can help us do that. You can help us by joining us on the air, becoming a volunteer, and by donating. Again, we need $30,000, and we need it quickly so we can build transmitters in Albany and Schenectady and be bringing bright, intelligent, independent thinking voices that are not driven by corporate interests to the airwaves. The airwaves are an extremely powerful medium. People are tuned in and listening. It's intimate. And it's an opportunity. It's one of the few places where, I've said this before, where in this day and age, you might hear an opinion that you don't already have. So please consider donating to this right now. If you're thinking about donating $50, think about donating $1,000. If that is terrifying and you can't do that and it's just no, bring it down to $250, but try to stay there. So again, please stand up and line up if you have a question. Is this a line? Okay, good. So we have people here. Hi, Ingrid. In the meantime, I'm gonna have people stationed along the sign, and we're gonna pass a jar. It's, you know, it's worship here. It's sacred. It's spiritual. So I hope you'll contribute. Thank you. And thank you to Chris for handing me $100 just, you know, before he started speaking. So.
Hello, sir. It was a pleasure listening to you, and every time I come to these kinds of events, I always have the same question that I've never asked it, so I hope I'm verbalizing it. I would bet $100 that less than 1% of the people here consider themselves like Republican or conservative. So when I come to these events, I keep seeing the same, you know, my group of people, you know, the same kind of people, and I'm wondering, you talked about people feeling disenfranchised and betrayed by the system and by the elites, and that's the kind of people that supposedly voted for Trump, and your message is recurring in your writing of, you know, coming together and focusing on helping each other. I feel like when you say that, I always think of the people that voted for Trump, you know, the lower class, you know, poor, uneducated, whatever, you know, there's that sector of the population is, and I'm not sure I'm saying it correctly, but what can we do to bring the power of those people so that they feel like they're part of us, like we're all together trying to struggle in this world against the big forces of capitalism and you know,
well, we have to
Ah.
organize around specific
Thank you.
issues that make their lives better. $15 minimum wage, universal health care. As Saul Alinsky said, there are no permanent allies, there's only permanent power. And that means reaching out to people whose political views we find distasteful and even repugnant. But as Rosa Luxemburg understood, Conversion takes place through acts of empathy that are carried out to people who are not your natural allies. And when you organize around those concrete issues, that is the starting point for political consciousness and political awakening. And one of the things that does disturb me is the kind of dismissive tone towards that disenfranchised white working class. I don't defend what the flag-waving Confederates do in the streets of Charlottesville or anywhere else, but they are also victims. And I would all encourage you to go back and read the great book, Brother to a Dragonfly, by Will Campbell, who had been the Baptist minister who, and in fact, that picture of walking the girls to school in Little Rock for desegregation, he's right next to them in the South, but became the chaplain to the Ku Klux Klan, in a sense that the state seeks to keep us polarized and divided. And we're not going to gain traction by speaking to them about their mythological past, and because they've retreated into the world of magical thinking like the Christian right. We're going to begin to break down that ideology by concretely addressing those forces that create that despair.
Hi, Chris. My name's Ted Hartman. I'm from this area. And I think anyone from this area would tell you that certainly on a local level, the Democratic Party has a very strong hold over Albany, Troy, Schenectady. There's been machine politics in this area for decades. And my question to you is, I think like you, I think we'll all agree that the corporate powers have taken over the Republican and Democratic parties. However, it seems to me that like a far-right white nationalist element has taken over the Republican Party. Do you think it's even worth our effort or time to try to insert socialists into the Democratic Party and to try to take over that party, because they do have the mechanisms of power? Even if they're not expressing our views, is it worth our time and effort to try to insert ourselves into and hijack sort of their power mechanisms, because they've got voter rolls, they've got organization. I don't think all of the people that voted Republican last time were people who are necessarily white nationalists, but they voted for people who are white nationalists. And so is it possible for us to take over the Democratic Party, insert socialists, and then use their mechanisms of power to try to enact what we want to go?
No. The Democratic Party is a creation of Wall Street. Those who are in power, Pelosi, Schumer, are creatures of that system. They know that if they were, for instance, to institute true campaign finance reform, they'd be out of a job. And we are watching the purges now within the DNC of the Bernie Sanders supporters, because they would rather go down than create an open system which would knock them off their perches or their platforms of power. Politics is a game of fear. I mean, the last liberal president we had was Richard Nixon. Not because he was a liberal or had any integrity or a heart, but because he was frightened of movements. And we have to rebuild those movements. That's our goal. And we have to hold fast to moral imperatives and not allow the establishment, including the Democratic Party, to buy us off. So you had the beginnings of a very widespread anti-war movement at the inception of the Iraq War, and what happened in 2004, they went into hiatus to elect John Kerry, who assured us that he wouldn't have pulled out of Fallujah. And this is a big mistake. You know, there's that great scene in Kissinger's memoirs, Don't Buy the Book, where Nixon and Kissinger are looking out the window. I think it's 71 or something. There's a huge anti-war demonstration, and the White House has put empty city buses in a ring around the White House to protect themselves. And Nixon's wringing his hand and says, "Henry, they're going to break through the barricades and get us." And that's where we want people in power to be.
Hi, Chris. Dan Lander here. I'm curious and was very interested in kind of the utility of the word resistance that you were using through this. And my question is, so if resistance is such a fundamental kind of experience as a human, does it kind of presuppose that there will always be something to resist against, which is equally as fundamental to our experience?
Yes, I mean, there's that great passage in Vasily Grossman's magnificent work, Life and Fate, one of probably the greatest work of fiction of the 20th century out of Russia, where he talks about the power of human kindness. I'm going to read it, but I don't want to butcher it. I don't have my iPhone, luckily. Where's Megan? Where is Megan around? Maybe can she find it for me? It's called Life and Fate. You all have to do is put in Vasily Grossman, Life and Fate, Chris Hedges, and you'll get it. But I think that yes, I come out of Calvin. I have a very dark view. I was a war correspondent. I have a very dark view of human nature. I think evil will always be there. And it is an eternal battle on our part to resist. And, I tell the story of, since I'm close to Schoharie, of my dad, who was a Presbyterian minister in Schoharie, all white, as you know, farm community. He was very outspoken about the civil rights, supporting the civil rights movement. This was a time when Martin Luther King was probably one of the most hated men in America in rural white enclaves like Schoharie County. He had been a sergeant in North Africa in World War II, but he came back from the war a pacifist and was very active in opposing the Vietnam War and the issue for which he got pushed out of the church. He was very outspoken about gay rights. His youngest brother was gay, my uncle, and my father understood the pain of being a gay man in the 50s and 60s. And that, I was 8, 9, very important time for me because he taught me that you're not rewarded for positions of virtue. In fact, you're usually punished for them. And what finally pushed the institutional church over the edge was his outspokenness about gay rights. And at the time, I was an undergraduate at Colgate. And my father, by the way, there was no gay GBLT organization at Colgate, so my dad actually brought the gay speakers down to the campus to have meetings with students, of which I would join. And finally, and he kept saying that you have to build a public organization, and finally, because they were too frightened to come out of the closet, he came down one day and took me out to lunch and told me that even though I wasn't gay, I had to found the GBLT Alliance at Colgate, which I did. It met and I would go into the dining hall at breakfast, lunch, or dinner. The guy would check off my card, hand it back, and go, faggot. So when the church told him to stop, he responded by holding an Easter service for the GBLT community at that time in the city of Syracuse, where he had a church. And he said, marriage is a sacrament. It is not a reward for being a heterosexual. And any church that refuses to honor the sacrament of marriage does not deserve to call itself Christian. And he was out. Years later, after being the Middle East bureau chief for the New York Times, I was publicly denouncing Bush's call to invade Iraq. I was booed off of a commencement stage, lynched by right-wing media, called into the New York Times and given a formal written reprimand and told I was no longer allowed to speak about the war in Iraq. And I realized, and I'd been there 15 years, it wasn't an easy moment. No one wants to lose their job. But I realized at that moment that I could muzzle myself in service to my career. But to do so would be to betray my dad. And I quit. And when I walked out the door of that building, for the first time in my life, I articulated what it was my father had given me. And that was freedom. I didn't need the New York Times to tell me who I was. I knew who I was. I was my father's son. And in the Christian faith, we call that resurrection. And that is the power of resistance, which perhaps even my father didn't see. And it will always be there, and those acts of resistance are what Father Daniel Berrigan told me when he defined faith as the good drawing, the belief that the good draws to it the good, even if all the empirical evidence around us says otherwise. The Buddhists call it karma. But I've seen rebellion, Eastern Europe. I was speaking at dinner about watching the Velvet Revolution. I was every night in the Magic Lantern Theater with Václav Havel and Dinsbeer and all the people who would inherit the government. And the walls of Prague that winter were filled with posters of the Charles University student Jan Palach, who, to protest the Soviet invasion in 1968, had gone to Wenceslas Square and lit himself on fire and died 4 days later from his burns. His funeral, which was a non-event, was never covered by the state media, was broken up by the police when his grave became a shrine. His body was exhumed, cremated, his ashes were given to his mother, and she was told she was not allowed to rebury them. And 2 weeks after the communist government fell, 10,000 people marched to Red Army Square and renamed it Jan Palach Square. I was in Wenceslas Square when Marta Kubashova, the great singer who had sung the anthem of defiance, a prayer for Marta that was broadcast out over the airwaves in 1968. And after the imposition of the Soviet-backed government, her recording stock was destroyed. She spent the intervening years working on an assembly line in a toy factory. She was banned from the airwaves. There were 500,000 people in Wenceslas Square that night. It was snowing when she walked out on that balcony and began to sing the prayer for Marta, and every Czech in that crowd knew every word. That is the power of resistance, the moral power of resistance. That even for all those people you think are asleep, somewhere, hear it.
Thank you, Chris, for being here.
Did we find Megan, or maybe? Yeah, did you find it? Yeah. Okay, I have to read one of my favorite quotes. It's from Vasily Grossman, and it's from his book Life and Fate.
Edge argues that Trump is not the origin of fascism. He is its symptom. His rise was enabled by decades of neoliberal disillusionment and institutional decay. It is a post-America world awakening not created by Trump. He also unpacked the difference between corporatism and oligarchy. Corporations like GM and IBM want stability. Oligarchies think Marx or Bezos exploit chaos. Edge warns that Marx represents this new class, one that monetizes basic life functions through instability. Edge warns us that fascism in America is not trapped in swastikas. Instead, it is wrapped in the cross and waving the flag, driven by the Christian right, rooted in white supremacy, patriarchy, and dominion theology. Edge argues that the institutions meant to uphold democracy, media, education, religion, are now compromised. Instead of reform, we have seen cooptation by corporations and growing social despair. Adding to the crisis, Political theorists like Sheldon Wolin describe inverted totalitarianism, a system where the facade of democracy hide deep privatization, perpetuate war, and shrinking public life. Edge also highlights rulings like the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the privileging of religious institutions. These are not random. As he writes, when law becomes subservient to dogma, democracy crumbles. Fascism today uses fear, surveillance, and legal maneuvering, not overt violence, but Edges insist resistance must be grounded in moral courage, truth-telling, and collective action, not just casting a vote. Chris Hedges warns us, American fascism is not a distant threat. It is here, cloaked in capitalism, patriotism, and religious momentum. But unpacking its roots gives us a chance to push back through solidarity, clarity, and uncompromising truth. What surprised you most about Edge's perspective? Drop your thoughts in a comment and do not forget to like and subscribe for more content. Until next time, cheers and have a good one.